Welcome to Sharks, Snakes and Shareholders, an Innovators Uncensored show where startup founders and entrepreneurs share their horror stories of shady term sheets, toxic boardrooms, and investors you wish you declined. Each week we'll have a new guest, ranging from angel investors and VCs to deal makers and founders, who will rank each of these horror stories on our investor red flag scale. Hosted by ShipShape.VC's very own Daniel Salko.
Hi, I'm Daniel Safko. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ShipShape.VC, a free-to-use investment search engine that enables founders to identify which investors they should be speaking with about the technology that they're building. We're really pleased about this show because it helps founders identify the horror stories that other founders have gone through without needing to repeat the same mistakes themselves. Ewa, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today in sunny Newport. Filming this episode of the podcast. Now, Ewa, you run fundraising playbooks, and these are behavioral science-led ways of helping founders with their investor outreach. Do you want to explain a little bit more about sort of your background and also what fundraising playbooks does?
Yes, absolutely. What the company is literally what the name suggests. It is the right strategies and playbooks for fundraising, and more specifically investor outreach. So I've worked for a small VC fund / family office, an angel syndicate briefly, a startup incubator and an investment firm. And I've always thought of my career as quite scattered and unrelated, until I've put it together into fundraising playbooks, which is a set of playbooks and strategies to reach any investor anywhere, even if a founder does not have a warm network to introduce them.
Brilliant. And yeah, I guess building on that experience that where you've seen lots of outreach from founders to investors, or potentially helping the founders with the outreach, or sitting there as an investor and assessing the opportunity. So yeah, really great to have you with us here today. We've got some three horror stories that have been submitted by founders. And if you're a founder out there and you're going through a scenario, or if you've been through scenarios that you think actually other founders ought to hear about, so that they can learn from them and potentially avoid the same situation happening to them, please do let us know via the link below. It would be great to cover it. And also the purpose of the podcast really is to help founders build that pattern recognition that even if they're going through their journey for the first time, they actually can gain from the experience of dozens of other founders that have been through some horrible scenarios that would be best avoided. So without further ado, we'll quickly go through our ranking system today. So every one of the stories we're going to rank, and we're going to essentially give a card color score. So we've got our green card, which is the oddball alert. So usually when it's not that major situation for the business, and the investor might just be a little bit weird. We've come across plenty of those, obviously. Backseat founder, so where the scenario is like a moderate scenario, and the investor is looking to get much more involved in the business than a normal investor might look to do. For a given type of investor. Boardroom vampire, so they're going to drain all your time if they're in the business, and actually it's moving towards a very severe scenario for the business in that particular horror story. Last one, business butcher, so does what it says on the tin. If you accept, if you accept them into the business, then business is dead, or the process of engaging in that investor has sort of is going to kill the business, basically. So we'll, I think, ramp up the severity as we go through these. But first story, high net worth individual commits to a 5-figure investment, and things then sort of change as the investor speaks more with the founders of the business. And so they are initially proposing 5-figure investment, and they think it's a significant enough investment to warrant a seat on the board. And then the investor flips from the investment being capital plus a board position to actually investment being the remuneration for their time on the board.
As in the equity granted, and then being the remuneration just for the board seat.
Exactly. Yeah. So they've swapped it away from 5-figure investment plus board seat through to actually no investment in terms of cash, but they take the same amount of equity from the business just by virtue of being on the board.
Yeah, that immediately makes me question their primary motives for engaging with that business in the first place. Did they intend to invest the capital monetary injection, or did they always just wanted equity in exchange for what would be basically advice? And I think when it comes to founders dealing with potential investment offers on the table, they should never, ever let any financial commitment to be then restructured into something else that does not involve the monetary injection. It's a completely different deal. It's a completely different discussion.
Yeah, that's definitely, and I can totally understand how founders might get sucked in, and then they might be willing to concede a little bit in terms of, okay, you're making a significant investment. Yes, I do want to give you a board position. I potentially see the value that you can offer. But yeah, it's really very unusual for like the initial offer, the initial terms to be completely withdrawn. Have you seen much of this happening?
I know there is quite a big divide on the notion of taking board seats in the first place, especially around pre-seed stages. And you've known my work for about like a couple of years, so I've spoken to close to 700 investors in the last 5 years, mostly early stage, mostly around UK and Europe. And I do ask them about board seats pretty much in every single call that I have. Like my Airtable was like this long, with all of my notes on them. And some investors, early stage VCs, pre-seed, they categorically say, no, we don't take board seats at pre-seed. It's just a waste of time. We don't want to distract the founder from the business. We trust them, we invest them, and so on. Whereas other ones, they're going to put it into completely different direction, where pre-seed is exactly where you need the guidance, the help, and the direction. So I find this to be one of the most polarizing topics in the term sheets, and something that founders should really consider on a case-by-case basis, because board seats, they should be merit-based. You want to, but real life, it's not a meritocracy. But you want to ensure that whoever you give your board seat to, they have some industry pull. They can open doors. They bring the expertise that is relevant to you. And in this case, in case of this story, it does sound to me like the high net worth used the original access to gain more bargaining power.
Yeah, so it's a classic, almost like a bait and switch, right? They're sort of luring the company in, and I think, again, it's really difficult when you're going at this for the first time to be able to read through that. But if you're thinking about appointing someone to your board, to me at least, if I think about like our NED relationship, it's the closest person in the business, bar my co-founder, to everything that's going on, and he is heavily financially invested in making the business a success. And like, actually, there has not yet been a discussion around, okay, like, does potential remuneration for the investment, the time investment, look like equity or cash? Like, there is a value that we associate with that involvement, but we actually, it hasn't come to the point of like, okay, this is what it needs to look like. That board member has been really, really like happy to just sort of, I guess, preserve the optionality, and we're happy with there being like, they were going to invest, biggest investor by far in the business at the time, happy with them coming onto the board and helping to guide the business and agreeing the terms of what that remuneration looked like, but as a separate conversation to the actual investment.
And then here, I think, without the financial skin in the game on the part of that high net worth individual, the incentives are not fully aligned. Like, I get that they've got equity, that's fine. But I think the original 5-figure investment that they had committed, that would make their incentives more aligned to actually be committed to that business and to help them.
And so, yeah, when we talk about skin in the game and helping the business, and how does, in your experience, how does someone having like financial commitment, financial skin in the game, change the pattern of behavior that they're likely to exhibit? What are they likely to do more of if they're
likely to more deliver on what they had promised, because they've invested the money. There's a little bit of a sunk cost fallacy playing here as well. So they want to make sure that this business will do well. It will be in their interest to help that business achieve higher valuation and exit better so that they can make the return on investment because they originally had put in their money.
Yeah. And what are some of the best ways that you've seen the board members deliver on that additional value to the business?
Probably being proactive with founders in a way that, I've seen one of the founders that I worked with. She told me that, she had a fantastic investor on the board that would be sending her like a monthly check-ins, asking her, okay, what sort of people are you looking for in terms of potential clients? What sort of partnerships are you looking at? What sort of investors are you looking at? And then she would send him a list and he would scout through his network to see how many of them they can make happen.
That's brilliant. It's such a great example of how that value add can really...
Canadian investor.
Okay,
Canadians are super nice.
That doesn't surprise me that it's like North America rather than UK. Like we definitely have, like we're, I think, quite fortunate, and there are other businesses obviously in the UK that do have very proactive investors that do that sort of thing. But I know that that's not that common in terms of the experiences of many businesses in the UK, where investors seem to be slightly more hands-off and reserved in terms of opening up their network to double down the value of the asset that they've just invested into. Whereas I contrast that with the experience of some of my friends who are founders of businesses in the US, and even at like funds that invest in lots of businesses in the US, in theory, should be super busy already just with like the admin burden of that, are also really proactive still in trying to help that business succeed.
Yes, and there's a little hack to it around which I've built one of the fundraising playbooks that I've got. Because if you look at the team pages and you have a look how many people are employed by that specific fund, and then let's say you're in a conversations with them, and founders should be asking questions such as, okay, do you take board seats? What does your support look like? Am I going to be assigned to an associate or a principal or a partner? And how many other board seats they have that are active, and what time commitment do they commit to each, and how do the check-ins look like, how often they are. But, founders don't often think to ask those questions when they're in investment discussions, but they should. They absolutely should.
It's such good advice as well for founders to be like, you're making a financial commitment into the business. How are you going to help maximize the return on that, but also for the other shareholders, right?
Yes.
I think that's fantastic, and that sounds like a great idea in terms of checklist in advance. And I think to earlier episodes in this series, like extracting that commitment, or at least being able to make sure that both parties within the transaction are properly diligencing their counterparty. It's so important. And I think actually just sort of thinking about our own experience, often found that if you're asking good questions of your counterparty, in many ways, that's a good signal for them too, because it means that you're going to be really selective about future investors into the business and getting maximum value out of it. And I guess that probably also translates in terms of your experience.
Yes, and it makes them respect you more as well. And if some of them try to flip it around and try to gaslight you instead into thinking that, oh, are you not trusting me? Do you not have trust in us? That's a red flag. Run away.
Yeah, you and I have spoken many an occasion around like weird behaviors that we see, or like good heuristics for like, hey, if they do this, then really bad signal. Nice. Okay, I think we should get around to like categorizing this, like what color card we're going to give it. I think, yeah, like in this case, like for me, yellow or orange. I don't know. Like it just it feels. It doesn't feel like just an oddball to me.
Yes. You know what? I would maybe even lean towards the green.
Green? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Because, and that was said earlier on one of your previous episodes, like until the money's in the bank, nothing. So, this here, I nothing is signed in here yet. They're still in the negotiations. They're still in the discussions. It's odd to try and restructure this, hence why oddball.
Yeah.
But I think, because it is still pre-commitment and still in that discussions, negotiations phase, I would be kind of like, okay, weird, but
yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think the reason why I would probably increase the potential severity of that scenario beyond that is because these founders, and I'm going on a hypothetical and like where my imagination has run off to on this one and trying to put myself in those shoes. If someone's come in and committed a 5-figure investment, you might have shared that.
You're right.
With other investors in the round.
Okay, you're right.
And then if you're suddenly going to change the makeup of that round based upon that investor sort of like flipping what they're doing, in almost like the best case for the business scenario, you've just lost five grand and you've kicked the investor out. But actually that means that you're short in the round versus where you might have previously stated your position to be. So that's the reason why I like at face value, agreed. Like, but like actually potentially.
So for me, that would even push it to boardroom vampire in that case. But then again, it's hard because then ultimately it is the founder's choice that they went ahead to other potential investors and shared that bit of information before the money was in the bank. And I fully get it. I fully get you need to create that momentum because that's literally what I help founders do as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, tricky.
Yeah. Obviously, and also I think, messy scenarios like that, not necessarily that scenario, but they happen all the time, right? Like your journey is just so uneven and broken up by these weird events that happen. It sort of feels like one of obviously both being of Polish extraction, feels like something like a Witcher storyline.
Yes.
where you as a character you end up like
and there's a million of different side quests that you can go on and you get distracted.
Exactly, yeah, distracted, and also like random stuff will happen, like but that you just never expect to happen, and it does feel like that's the path that you're on.
Yeah. I get it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. All right, I think let's move on to story number 2.
Yes.
So, and actually, I think this builds upon a few of the themes that we've just touched upon. So, these founders ended up taking in what was self-described as value-add investors, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a VC fund that didn't say that they were value-add investors.
Yes.
It seems to just be like just a bit like every fund is in theory.
Zero value investor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No one says that.
And we're not contrarian. We invest in, like, everyone says they're contrarian. Everyone says that they're value add.
Yeah.
And few demonstrate either, and even fewer probably both. And then so they promise to make lots of introductions to clients. So if you're thinking about this as a founder, like big tick, revenue is the best source of of value creation. Also helped said that they would help with sourcing investors for the next round and sourcing talent. And the founders budged on the terms of the investment in exchange for these commitments, and they sound quite loose, to ensure that happened. Investor has delivered absolutely nothing against all of those, and the founders now regret massively not putting terms in place that held those investors accountable with regards to the deal that they got or on those.
Yeah. The world of introductions is inherently tricky. And I used to work in that too. So one of the previous investment firms that I worked for, that was basically an advisory, and we would be doing the matchmaking and the introductions between founders and investors, or commercial opportunities sometimes. And how I talk about this is that making an introduction is a trilateral equation, where you've got, how good is the founder, how good is the match, and on the third part is whatever that investor or a third party is thinking, feeling, or dealing with at a certain moment. So, we could have a fantastic founder and I could make a great introduction for them. Still no guarantee that the investor will respond. Even if it's a perfect match, even if it's a perfect founder, even if it's a unicorn company soon to be, they could still not respond.
Yep.
So, I do see how this could get muddy, and I can think of so many explanations that these investors could give to a founder of why they did not make any introductions. Maybe they could even have emails to show for it where they try to initiate an introduction and never heard back, or it was a decline or whatever. So yeah, very, very tricky world, in which I think, of course, the deliverables should be put in place. And ideally, if a founder wants to push for the deliverables in terms of successful outcomes, so a successful introduction made, most founder-friendly. A lot of investors or introducers, however, will want to push it more to their end or a middle, which is no, the KPIs will be measured based on the number of introductions we initiate for you.
Rather than
rather
outcomes.
than successful ones.
Which I think makes sense in terms of like de-risking, like how de-risking their own business model fundamentally.
It's one of the reasons why I moved away from that model. That's why I don't do introductions these days, because I just think there's a lot of intricacies and problems with this.
And it's immensely time consuming. That's a point that I want to touch on, that once you've got a few years in and you've spent a lot of time looking at the space, you start to see through this almost like shiny veneer of different funds, different investors who promise the world. But actually, when you look at the fund itself, like, funds don't actually have that much budget to allocate to resources in the team.
Yes, exactly. That's another question. Who makes those introductions? Is it one of the partners who's sitting on 15 different boards? Or is it one
and
of
assessing future opportunities as well for investment?
Yes.
And raising the next fund, probably.
Or is it one of the analysts or associates who are fresh out of uni and they have zero networks?
Or indeed credibility, because if you're sat at, I don't know, like a major bank and an associate from a small-time VC fund with maybe tens of millions on like AUM, and you're sitting on potentially billions.
I've seen it worse. I'll give you a worse one, because one of the advisory companies that I know of, and that's from a completely different country. I lived in a few countries. I'm not going to say which one. But yeah, it was a matchmaking advisory. They're making introductions to founders, and no one would want to be introduced. What the managing partner did is that instead they decided to provide feedback from the said investors of why they declined that introduction. So he says to the founder, "I'm so sorry, that this person said no, this is what they said. They don't want to be introduced, this is what they said." And, he copied and pasted all of our feedback. The problem was, across all of the different pieces of feedback, there were similar, same grammatical mistakes. So you could tell that it was just him.
They're making up feedback.
Yes.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
That's, wow.
I swear.
Special.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I might.
And he's put them in different colors even and everything, but yeah.
Oh yeah, because everyone knows that everyone likes using different colors. Oh wow, that is. So these founders are getting like rainbow feedback that literally has been made up by the person who's meant to be making these introductions. Wow. Okay.
I swear. There's a lot of time wasters in this space.
Yep. And I guess if you're paid solely for the effort rather than outcome, that can potentially, so like if someone's promising to deliver value across a whole range of activities, but they're charging you only on like the effort basis, then I'm sure it took some time to come up with some of that feedback, right? But like zero value created.
Yeah, and time wasted. Yeah.
Yeah, for everyone. That's a real shame. I guess so. Moving on to like what could founders do in this scenario with VCs? So you mentioned about your playbook earlier and how you have like a checklist of like, do you do X, Y, Z for the companies? Like, what does that look like in terms of check-ins? What do you potentially do in those? Like, what can founders do, or what would you suggest potentially founders look at doing with regards to holding investors accountable?
Yeah. So if we're talking specifically introductions from investors, then ideally we would want to ask for historical data on this for a company in either a similar vertical that to you or similar stage, and ask them, like how many introductions have you made for them? How many of them have actually transformed into a fruitful partnership or investment? So, testimonials, basically. And when it comes to the wider introducers out there, that's a whole nother ballgame, especially when it comes to introducers who's made their living on introductions.
Yep.
That's where you need to be triple times more, diligent.
I wondered, actually, so we've had, and we'll actually, funny enough, we'll touch upon this in the last scenario. We've had scenarios where we've had someone try and shift, say, oh, we'll deliver all this value add. And my co-founder Alistair and I have pushed back, and Alistair in particular in the early days, because sort of got a few more grey hairs than I do, sort of pushed back saying, actually, you know what? And this actually relates to the first story too. So let's separate your promise of value add from your equity investment. And basically, you can invest on the same terms as everyone else. No one gets any kind of sweetheart deals here. But if you're saying that you can add additional value in these types of ways, then we're actually really happy to have a separate agreement for you with vesting period and like a schedule and essentially like you're committing to doing X, Y, Z. You think that these are all plausible. Let's agree that,
Absolutely. That's when the incentives align.
Yep.
Because, once you've given them equity, well, the train has left the station.
Yeah.
They got what they wanted.
Yeah. And there's like, if you're a real cynic and if the fund itself are quite cynical about their practice, then they're just going to make the commitment, get a better deal on the equity and not follow through. And hopefully you make it up in the meantime.
Although, especially when it comes to investors, it is in their interest to make introductions for you.
It should be, yeah.
It should be, yeah, because, they want to make sure that you're successful and that you're generating good ROI for them in the future.
Yep.
So it should be in their interest. However, that being said, in any given VC portfolio, let's say we've got 10 founders, there will be favorites and there will be laggards. So it's usually the favorites that get the follow-on investment. They will get the most introductions. They will be the VC's favorites, and that's who they focus on because then the VC sees, oh, this is our unicorn.
Yep.
Let me focus all my energy on them and them only. And they forget about all of the other ones, which is brutal.
Yep.
But that's one of the many inefficiencies of the VC model.
Yeah, it's a game of outliers, right? So they've got to double down on what they perceive to be the winners. Okay, cool. Let's move on to ranking this. I think this is actually unfortunately pretty standard, and like in terms of severity of impact to the business on a day-to-day basis, I actually think it's kind of green. Like it depends on the term, what the terms were.
I'm leaning more here towards
Like the high
orange,
fine.
yellow. So opposite to our previous scenario.
Yeah. Do you want to justify yours, and I'll
Yes, because I think the opportunity cost in here is huge.
Yep.
Of what the founders could have gotten
instead.
If that value add investor genuinely made the introductions to clients and helped sourcing investors for the next round and helped source talent.
Yep.
This is huge promises. And had they been fulfilled, I feel like they could have gotten a lot, but they didn't. So I think it's a backseat founder.
Yeah, I think we got a bad deal was made. Sunk cost fallacy. Is it actively dragging down the business? Probably not so much, unless there's a reputation for being not great investors to have on the cap table, and therefore like potentially blocks future investment. So yeah, I can understand how you might grade it's more severe. I was just thinking like in terms of, again, sunk cost fallacy, like you've made a bad deal. It's going to happen on occasion. Unfortunately, it sounds like they got a great deal of equity in the business, but yeah. Okay. Story number 3. This is actually about us as a business. So we submitted a horror story. I thought it was only fair, given like lots of founders have done so. Obviously, they're anonymized. So French family office were introduced to us by at the time someone who was a well-regarded introducer in the UK, and that introducer was very keen to make sure that we had signed up to their sort of like 4% plus other like small fees on top of it. We actually hadn't engaged them for that purpose, but they were like, I'm going to introduce you to this family office. They are actively looking for deals, and I'm going to make you sign this. So we're like, okay, if it happens, then fine. There was no like, and one other thing that we thought was quite interesting was that the introducer didn't want any kind of retainer or anything like that. They were just like, okay, I'm happy with this being success fee only. So they evidently felt confident about it, and well-regarded, had been introduced by another well-regarded introducer. So we thought this looks okay so far. Anyway, so this is a French family office. They're setting up a UK domiciled fund of 10 million. They're looking for like their first, like I think it was 3 or 4 investments at the time. And that number racked up later on. We found out there are other companies that were engaged in a similar way. Anyway, so the French family office, same with VC fund, solo GP, and basically things started getting pushed back a little bit with timelines where they said, oh, our tax affairs just aren't in order for us to be able to set up the fund and transfer funds from another jurisdiction. And it was quite early still from our perspective, and didn't really, we thought this was all plausible, if a bit uncomfortable from our perspective. Anyway, so the rest of the round came together. So they were doing, this family office was doing a 400k ticket of a 600k round, and actually they had indicated that they were now in a position to move ahead as well, which was a good reason for us to move ahead with closing out the round. All of the like legal documentation, signatures, everything, term sheet, etc., all signed, including then like there's a subscription agreement where you're agreeing to subscribe for a number of shares, and you're also committing to transfer the capital. All of that went off without a hitch. Like, there were usual delays within like the round. I think only one of them had been caused by them, and it wasn't very long. So everything looked okay. And then basically everyone else transferred their money. Family office didn't. And we're like, what's gone on? And they're like, oh, sorry, there's just like, it's been held up by the bank in this instance. And then it just kept on dragging for months and months and months. And I think we kept faith way too long in this instance. But they were our only option at the time. And it got to the point where that sort of purported solo GP, basically, like, we were desperate for cash. We need to make payroll, and the solo GP basically said, oh yeah, look, we went to them with a deal saying, hey, look, you are individually wealthy. Like, we have seen evidence of that. Like, they were taking us out for like fancy dinners and all the rest of it. Like, you are evidently individually wealthy. They owned like a fleet of cars and things like that. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you sort of transfer some of your own capital as a loan, and then whenever your tax issue or whatever the issue is at the bank gets resolved, you can take that back out from the amount that you're investing. And the individual agreed. And then even sent a screenshot of the money being transferred to us. Again, never arrived. And to this day, we know that that individual like was wealthy, had made investments, but actually in this instance, there were half a dozen companies in the same situation as us. We had to let staff go who didn't deserve to be let go, but other companies had folded as well. And yeah, I mean, I think that was just such a huge lesson for us. And there should have been red flags going off earlier about how easy things felt easy at times and then slightly more difficult at others. But most of the difficulty felt around the tax position and like the transfer of funds from a different jurisdiction. And yeah, it felt so naive coming off the back of that.
I've seen this happen, and my question is, what's their game? Like, what's their motive? What's their motive to spend time on reassuring you, sending you emails, like doing the screenshots and everything? It takes time away from them.
Yep.
And away from their business. So, and you know, you've not sent them any money. They've not asked for anything like, you know, legal fees or anything like that. Because if they did, then I would be thinking, okay, it's a scam. I can see how it works.
Yep.
Because they're asking for your money and then they're just lying straight to your face.
Yep.
But they haven't asked you for any money. And this is where I'm kind of like, so what's their motive to do that?
We actually, so I mean, like, as sometimes happens often happens with funds, when they invest, you're expected to pick up a portion of the legal fees for the round. We had agreed to that. So, but then they hadn't chased us for that as well. So they evidently weren't in it for like even trying to dupe us out of like some portion of fees that had been in theory incurred.
Which also then makes you more likely to believe their explanations.
Yep.
That it makes you think that, okay, that must be genuine. But also I think, you know, the constant reassurance coming from them, the screenshots,
Yeah.
the signed terms, this is the biggest damage that they could have done because they're not letting you go.
No, all the others.
They're stringing you along.
Yeah. We made huge mistakes in terms of not leveraging that potential offer and building up optionality. And like like when I think about funding rounds, I'm like, okay, how do I get the maximum number of interested buyers interested?
Yeah, diversifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a case of, diversification. I like, of course, you know, like if you make like a one single large bet and you're riding out on it, then yes, there is a risk that it can go sour.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, in this case, that the biggest red flag is the reassurance coming from their way.
Yep.
And the second portion of it is the fact that they never try to solicit any money from you, is what makes it very kind of like believable.
Met this individual like, I think 8 to 10 times in person.
Where did they get their money from then?
So they were, and there was evidence of this as well. Like they had exited a business, and like not for an insignificant sum. So, and they had also invested in other businesses too. So for us, it felt like this is real, but evidently wasn't. But like there were lessons that we definitely could have learned
But they
earlier
have
on.
kept like the money in some like offshore accounts and so on, and that's why the tax affairs, and they couldn't move it to UK.
They should have prompted us. So you're like now thinking back, they should have like if they had difficulty moving domicile, they should have got us to re-domicile the business to take the transfer of the funds in that jurisdiction, so that there shouldn't have been that issue. So like we should have asked these types of questions, and that like now I've thought about this a lot because people lost their jobs as off the back of it. So you always like analyze it and try and think, what can I do differently? Optionality is definitely one. But actually there's some really logical questions like that one that we should have asked and should have proposed, but didn't, because we thought, okay, well, like we don't want to sort of like upset this because this is huge for us at the time, huge ticket. Yeah. I'm gonna
Very clear. Yes.
Yeah, and it nearly did. Very, very nearly did.
Yes. Yes.
Eva, this has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And are there any sort of words of wisdom that you want to sort of give to founders who are listening, potentially going through the experience of running a business for the first time?
Yes. And we even spoke about this morning, where I said to you that I feel like recently, this year felt like a minefield to me that I am trying to navigate very, very delicately. So to the founders listening, especially first-time founders, I would tell them, whatever offer is coming your way, whatever partnership, whatever proposal, do not ever agree on the spot. Your standard response to whatever is coming your way is, I'll think on it.
Sound advice.
Yeah. Sleep on it, chat to your friends, put it via lawyer GPT, do whatever you need. But yeah, I'll think on it. You never say yes and you never say no.
Eva, thank you so much. This has been brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.